Welcome to Yoga for All by the Yoga Funk. I'm your host, Jake,
And I'm Hannah.
and we are so excited to have you here for our first ever deep dive.
It's going to be a fun one.
We really wanted to create a space where we could take all of the amazing things people are curious about and really dive deep into them.
Yeah, go beyond the surface level stuff.
Exactly. We're going to unpack the history, the nuances, the different perspectives.
Make it fun.
Absolutely. We want this to feel like a conversation learning together. So for our very first deep dive, we thought, what better place to start than with yoga?
It's such a rich topic and something that so many people are curious about.
It really is. And whether you're completely new to yoga or you've been practicing for years, we think there's something here for everyone.
We're going to uncover the ancient roots of yoga and explore its evolution over time and delve into those incredible benefits that yoga offers for both body and mind.
Yeah, and we'll do our best to answer some of the big questions. What exactly is yoga? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
And how can it help us live healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives?
So let's take a deep breath, roll out our mats, and get ready to dive deep into the world of yoga.
All right, so first things first, what exactly is yoga? When people hear that word, what should pop into their minds?
That is a great question, and it's one that doesn't have a simple answer. Yoga, as we know it today, is kind of like a tapestry woven from many different threads. Physical postures, breathing techniques, meditation, philosophy, and even ethical guidelines. But at its core, yoga is all about uniting the mind, body, and spirit. The word yoga itself comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to yoke or to unite.
To yoke or to unite? I like that. So it's about bringing together these different aspects of ourselves.
Exactly. And traditionally, the goal of yoga was to achieve a state of liberation or freedom from suffering. It was seen as a path to self-realization, to understanding our true nature.
So it's not just about stretching and bending.
Not at all. While the physical postures known as asanas are a big part of modern yoga, they were originally just one small piece, a much larger puzzle.
This is fascinating. I'm already starting to see yoga in a whole new light. So where did all of this begin? Take us back to the ancient origins of yoga.
Okay, so buckle up, because we're going way back in time, potentially even before written history. Some scholars believe that yoga practices might have existed in India as far back as 3000 BCE or even earlier.
Wow, that's ancient, but how do we know that? I mean, if there weren't written records, how can we be sure?
It's true that the earliest origins of yoga are shrouded in mystery, but archaeologists have uncovered artifacts like seals and sculptures that depict figures and poses resembling yoga asanas. So those suggest that some form of yogic practice might have been present in ancient Indus Valley civilizations.
So we're talking about practices that predate even the oldest scriptures?
Potentially, yes. The first clear evidence we have of yoga practices popping up in written form is around the early first millennium BCE, primarily in the eastern Ganges basin in India.
And what kind of texts are we talking about here?
So we see early mentions of yoga like practices in some pretty important texts like the Rig Veda, one of the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism. It speaks of practices that involve breath control and medication, which are core elements of yoga.
So from the very beginning, yoga intertwined with spirituality and philosophy.
Absolutely. And as yoga developed, it drew influences from various traditions and schools of thought that were flourishing in the eastern Ganges basin at that time.
So it sounds like this region was a real melting pot of spiritual ideas.
It was. And yoga emerged from this rich tapestry of traditions, absorbing and integrating different perspectives and practices along the way.
So who are some of the key figures or movements that shaped the development of yoga during this early period?
Well, one of the most significant influences came from a group of wandering ascetics known as the Shramana movements.
Shramana movements. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically, these were groups of spiritual seekers who challenged the traditional Vedic beliefs and emphasized practices like meditation, self-discipline, and introspection as paths to liberation.
So were they all about yoga?
Not necessarily all about yoga as a unified system, but they played a huge role in shaping its core principles and practices. Two of the most famous Shamayana movements were Jainism and Buddhism, both of which incorporated yogic practices into their own spiritual frameworks.
Wait, Buddhism? I always thought of Buddhism as separate from yoga.
It is a distinct tradition, of course, but early Buddhism, particularly in its Theravada form, incorporated many practices that we now associate with yoga, especially meditation and mindfulness techniques.
Mind blown. I never knew that. So how did these Shramanda movements specifically influence the development of yoga?
Well, they placed a strong emphasis on self-awareness, ethical conduct, and mental discipline as essential steps on the path to spiritual awakening. These ideas became deeply intertwined with the evolving practice of yoga.
So yoga was becoming more than just a set of physical techniques. It was developing into a comprehensive system for inner transformation.
Exactly. And this evolution continued as yoga interacted with other philosophical systems in ancient India, like Samkhya.
Samkhya, another new term. Break it down for me.
Think of Samkhya as a philosophy that explores the nature of reality and the relationship between consciousness and matter. It proposes that reality consists of two fundamental aspects of the Purusha, which represents pure consciousness or the true self, and Prakriti, which encompasses everything else, the material world, our bodies, our minds, and all the fluctuations of our thoughts and emotions.
So Samkhya is saying there's this separation between our pure consciousness and the messy world around us.
Exactly. And guess what? Yoga steps in and says, hey, there's a way to bridge that gap. There's a way to experience Purusha, your true self, beyond all the distractions of Prakriti.
So yoga is offering a method to connect with our pure consciousness, to break free from the limitations of the material world.
That's a great way to put it. And the integration of these ideas from Samkhya into yoga had a profound impact on its development.
I can see how understanding this connection could add a whole new dimension to someone's yoga practice.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that yoga is not just about physical flexibility, but also about cultivating mental clarity, emotional balance, and a deeper connection to our inner selves.
This is fascinating stuff. So we've got these Shramani movements shaping early yoga and the integration of Samkhya philosophy adding depth and complexity. What happens next in this evolution?
Well, all of these influences set the stage for what we might call the classical era of yoga, where a more systematized approach starts to emerge. And a key figure in that development is a guy named Patanjali.
Patanjali, that name definitely rings a bell. Wasn't he the one who wrote the Yoga Sutras?
You got Patanjali is kind of like the rock star of yoga. We don't know a ton about him as a historical figure. Some scholars believe he lives sometime between the 2nd century BCE and the 4th century CE. What we do know is that he compiled this super important text called the Yoga Sutras, which became the foundational text of what we often call classical yoga.
So the Yoga Sutras is like the Bible of yoga.
It's a pretty good analogy. Think of it as a collection of concise, aphoristic verses, kind of like little nuggets of wisdom. They outline the philosophy and practice of yoga in this systematic way, offering a roadmap for achieving the ultimate goal of yoga, which is liberation or enlightenment.
Wow, I'm sensing another deep dive coming on. So what are some of the key ideas that Patanjali lays out in the Yoga Sutras?
Well, first and foremost, he defines the very word yoga. In his 2nd sutras, he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind.
That really resonates with me. I'm constantly bombarded with thoughts and distractions. I can see how stilling the mind could be a game changer.
Exactly. Patanjali recognized that our minds are constantly in motion, bombarded with thoughts, emotions, and sensory input. And he's saying that yoga is the practice of calming that storm, of finding inner peace and clarity.
Okay, so how do we do that? Does he give us any practical guidance?
He absolutely does. He lays out an 8-limbed path or 8 steps to achieving this state of yoga, which is known as Ashtanga yoga.
8 limbs, that sounds intense.
It can be, but it's also incredibly insightful. Each limb represents a different aspect of yoga practice, and they're all interconnected.
Okay, I'm all ears. Walk me through these 8 limbs.
All right, so the first 2 limbs are all about ethical guidelines and self-discipline. They're called yamas and niyamas. Think of them as the foundation for living a mindful and ethical life. which creates a supportive environment for your yoga practice to flourish.
So, kind of like setting the stage for the deeper yogic practices.
Exactly. Then comes the third limb, which is asana.
Now we're talking. This is where the poses come in, right?
You got it. But here's a little twist. In Patanjali's time, asana didn't refer to a whole bunch of different poses. It mainly meant finding a comfortable and steady seated posture for meditation. The idea was to prepare the body for extended periods of stillness and inner focus.
So the focus was on stillness and meditation, not the physical acrobatics we often associate with yoga today.
Precisely. The physical postures we see today developed later on, influenced by various traditions.
Interesting. All right, so we've got ethical guidelines, self-discipline, and a steady seated posture. What's next on this eight-limbed path?
The fourth limb is called pranayama.
Pranayama? That sounds like something to do with breath.
Your sharp prana refers to the vital life force, energy that flows through us. And ayama means to control or regulate. So pranayama is all about breath control techniques. Patanjali recognized that our breath is intimately connected to our mental and emotional states. By regulating our breath, we can calm the nervous system, reduce stress, and create a sense of inner stability.
Okay, I've heard that controlling your breath can have a powerful impact on your state of mind, but I've never really tried it.
It's truly remarkable. Even simple breathing exercises can shift your energy and bring a sense of calm.
So we're 4 limbs down. What are the remaining 4 all about?
Well, the next 3 limbs focus on training the mind. The fifth limb is pratyahara. It basically means withdrawing the senses from acharobrita, and basically means withdrawing the senses from thought.
External distractions, turning inward, shutting out the noise of the world.
Exactly. It's about shifting our attention from the external to the internal, creating space for deeper introspection.
So I can see how that would be crucial for cultivating inner peace. Okay, what about limbs 6 and 7?
Limb 6 is dharana, which is concentration. It's about focusing the mind on a single point, like your breath, a mantra, or an image. And then limb 7 is dhyan, which is meditation. This is where the real magic happens. Through sustained concentration, the mind becomes absorbed in the object of meditation, leading to a state of deep inner peace and clarity.
Okay, so we're moving from controlling the breath and senses to concentrating the mind and then meditating. What's the final limb, the 8th limb?
The 8th limb is samadhi.
Samadhi? I've heard that word thrown around in spiritual circles. What does it actually mean?
Samadhi is often translated as liberation or enlightenment. It's a state of profound absorption where the mind merges with the object of meditation, transcending the boundaries of the individual self.
So it's like experiencing a unity consciousness, a oneness with everything.
Exactly. It's about reaching a state of pure awareness where the sense of separation dissolves and you experience a profound connection to the universe. And all that is.
Wow, that's a pretty lofty goal.
It is, but Patanjali's Yoga Sutras provide a map, a set of practices to guide us on that journey.
It's amazing. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. The origins of yoga, the influence of the Sramana movements and Sankhya philosophy, and Patanjali's 8-limbed path. What happens after this classical period? How does yoga continue to evolve?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we'll dive into next.
I can't wait.
So before we jumped into part 2 of our yoga deep dive, we're talking about Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras, which really laid the groundwork for what we think of as classical yoga.
Yeah, the 8-limb path he outlines is pretty mind-blowing. It's incredible to think about how those principles were developed centuries ago and are still so relevant today.
It really speaks to the enduring wisdom of yoga, doesn't it? But as you mentioned, yoga didn't stop evolving with Patanjali. It continued to branch out and adapt, incorporating new influences and practices over the centuries.
So that's what I'm really curious about. How did we get from the classical yoga of Patanjali to the wide variety of yoga styles we see today?
That's a journey that spans centuries and involves this fascinating interplay of different traditions and lineages. One of the most significant developments after the classical period was the emergence of Hatha Yoga, sometime between the 9th and 11th centuries.
Hatha yoga. I've definitely heard that term before. It's the style most commonly practiced in studios today, right?
Exactly. Hatha Yoga is what many people picture when they think of yoga. The physical postures or asanas, the focus on flexibility and strength. But it's important to remember that Hatha yoga is still very much rooted in the principles of classical yoga, particularly the idea of preparing the body for deeper spiritual practices.
So even though it emphasizes the physical aspects, Hatha yoga is still ultimately about connecting with something deeper within ourselves.
Absolutely. The word hatha itself is often interpreted as meaning forceful or willful, but it can also be understood as a reference to the balance of opposing energies in the body, represented by the sanha and the muntha.
That makes sense. So how did this shift towards a more physical practice come about? What were some of the key influences that shaped Hatha yoga?
Well, one of the major influences came from a tradition known as Tantra.
Tantra, that's a word that often gets thrown around with a lot of misconceptions. What does it actually mean in the context of yoga?
It's true that Tantra has often been misunderstood and even sensationalized in popular culture. But in its essence, Tantra is a spiritual path that emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things and seeks to harness the energy of the body and mind for spiritual transformation.
So, how did tantric principles influence the development of Hatha yoga?
Tantra introduced this idea of working with energy channels in the body, known as nadis, and energy centers, known as chakras, which were seen as key to unlocking spiritual potential.
I've definitely heard those terms before, but I'll admit I'm a bit fuzzy on the details. Can you explain a bit more about how these energy systems work?
Imagine nadis as pathways for energy to flow throughout your body, kind of like a network of rivers. And chakras are like hubs of energy located along these pathways. They're associated with different aspects of our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
So the idea is that by working with these energy systems, we can create balance and harmony within ourselves.
Exactly. And Hatha yoga incorporated many practices from Tantra at purifying and balancing these energies, including physical postures, breathing exercises, and meditation techniques.
So this is where we start seeing more dynamic poses beyond just seated meditation.
Precisely. Hatha yoga developed this whole range of postures, many of which are still practiced today in various forms of yoga. These postures were designed not only to increase flexibility and strength, but also to stimulate the flow of energy through the nadis and chakras.
That's fascinating. So we've got Tantra influencing Hatha yoga, which in turn shapes the physical practice of yoga as we know it today. Were there any specific texts or teachings that emerged from this period that codified the principles of Hatha yoga?
Yes, absolutely. There are a few key texts that became highly influential in the Hatha yoga tradition. One of them is the Hatha Yoga Pratipika, written by a yogi named Swatmarama sometime in the 15th century. It's essentially a manual for Hatha yoga practice, describing different asanas, breathing techniques, cleansing practices, and even techniques for manipulating the flow of energy in the body.
Sounds like a pretty comprehensive guide to Hatha yoga.
It is. It's still studied and revered by yogis today as a foundational text of that Hatha yoga lineage. And from this lineage, many other branches and styles of yoga emerged.
So this is where we get styles like Vinyasa, Bikram, Yin yoga, and all the others.
You got it. The 20th century in particular saw an explosion of different yoga styles as teachers blended ancient techniques with modern understandings of the body and mind. Some styles, like Vinyasa, emphasize a flowing, dynamic practice that connects breath with movement. Others, like Yin yoga, focus on holding poses for longer periods to release tension in the connective tissues.
So it's amazing how yoga has adapted and evolved over time while still staying true to its roots.
It's a testament to the power and versatility of this practice. But let's not forget about the other branches of yoga that developed alongside Hatha yoga. Remember, we talked about how yoga was incorporated into various Indian traditions like Jainism and Buddhism. Those yogic lineages continued to evolve as well, each with their own unique flavor and emphasis.
Right. So what happened to those yogic lineages? Did they continue to develop and influence the broader practice of yoga?
They absolutely did. Jain yoga, for example, continued to emphasize practices that cultivate nonviolence, self-discipline, and spiritual liberation. They developed their own unique set of asanas and breathing techniques designed to support those goals.
And what about Buddhist yoga? How did that evolve?
Buddhist yoga is incredibly diverse, reflecting the many different schools and traditions within Buddhism. Some forms of Buddhist yoga emphasize physical postures and breathing exercises as a way to cultivate mindfulness and concentration. Others focus more on meditation and visualization techniques as paths to enlightenment.
So even though these yogic traditions branched out, they still held on to that core essence of seeking a higher state of consciousness.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about yoga. It's this incredibly rich and diverse tapestry, but there's a common thread that runs through it all.
It's incredible to think about how yoga has touched so many different cultures and traditions over thousands of years. But how did yoga make its way to the West? When did Westerners first start getting interested in this ancient practice?
That's a great question. The story of yoga in the West is actually pretty recent. Relatively speaking, it starts to gain some attention in the mid 19th century thanks to scholars and philosophers who were studying Eastern traditions and translating ancient texts.
So it was initially an intellectual curiosity?
In a way, yes, but it wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that yoga really started to gain a foothold in the West, thanks to the efforts of some key figures who introduced yogic practices to a wider audience.
Who were some of these pioneers who brought yoga to the West?
One of the most influential figures was Swami Vivekananda, a Hindu monk and philosopher who traveled to the West in the late 19th century and gave lectures and presentations on yoga and Vedanta philosophy.
What was it about Vivekananda's message that resonated with Western audiences?
He was this charismatic speaker who presented yoga not as this rigid dogma, but as this universal path to self-realization, emphasizing its practical benefits for physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. He adapted his teachings to make them accessible to Western audiences, focusing on themes of self-discovery, inner peace, and the unity of all beings.
So he kind of paved the way for yoga to become more mainstream in the West.
He did, and then throughout the 20th century, other teachers and gurus followed in his footsteps, introducing different styles of yoga and establishing schools and centers dedicated to teaching and practicing yoga.
That's fascinating. That's amazing to think about how yoga, which was once this relatively obscure Eastern practice, has become such a global phenomenon.
It really is, and it's a testament to the enduring power of yoga to transform lives. But you know what else is amazing? The incredible benefits that people are experiencing from practicing yoga.
Yeah, that's what I'm really excited to talk about. We've covered so much ground in terms of the history and evolution of yoga, but ultimately it's the personal transformation that matters most. What are some of the ways that yoga can positively impact our lives?
That's what we'll explore in our next segment. Get ready to dive into the incredible world of yoga's benefits.
All right, so we've journeyed through this fascinating history of yoga, from its ancient roots in India to its evolution across centuries and continents.
It's really incredible how this ancient practice has kind of stood the test of time, adapting and transforming.
Exactly, and now I think we're both ready to dive into what might be the most exciting part of this whole deep dive: the benefits of yoga.
Yeah, this is where it gets really personal.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is the benefits of yoga are so wide-ranging, for sure. Physical, mental, emotional, even spiritual benefits.
There's truly something for everyone.
So let's start with the physical benefits, since that's often what initially draws people to yoga.
Yeah, makes sense. And one of the most obvious benefits is increased flexibility.
Oh yeah, I've definitely heard that one before. But how does yoga actually improve flexibility?
Well, yoga postures are designed to stretch and lengthen muscles, improving your range of motion. Think about it. In our daily lives, we often get stuck in these repetitive movements and postures.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right, and over time, that can lead to tightness, stiffness, and even pain. Yoga helps to counteract those patterns by gently encouraging your body to move in new ways.
So it's not just about touching your toes, it's about creating more freedom and ease in your body.
Precisely. Increased flexibility can improve your posture, reduce your risk of injuries, and even make everyday movements easier.
What about strength? Does yoga build muscle? I always thought of it as more of a stretching practice.
It's definitely both. While yoga isn't typically considered a high-intensity workout, many yoga poses require you to support your own body weight, which builds strength, especially in the core, arms, and legs.
So You're saying I don't necessarily need to hit the gym to get stronger?
Not at all. Yoga can be a fantastic way to build functional strength, the kind of strength you need for everyday activities.
Okay, flexibility, strength. Yeah, what else? What are some other physical benefits we should mention?
Well, balance is a big one. Yoga is all about finding balance, both physically and mentally. And many yoga poses challenge your balance, which improves stability and coordination.
I've definitely wobbled my way through some balancing poses. It's harder than it looks.
It definitely takes practice. But improving your balance can help prevent falls, especially as we get older. And it's not just about physical balance either. Yoga helps to cultivate a sense of inner balance.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm starting to see how the physical and mental benefits of yoga are so intertwined.
Exactly. And that's what's so beautiful about this practice. It's holistic, it addresses the whole person.
So, are there any other physical benefits we should touch on?
Oh, there are so many kills. Yoga can also improve cardiovascular health, reduce chronic pain, and even boost your immune system.
Wait, really? Yoga can help with all that?
Yep, there's a growing body of research that supports these benefits. Yoga can lower blood pressure, improve circulation, reduce inflammation, and even enhance the activity of immune cells. It's like a multivitamin for your body.
I'm starting to think yoga is like a magic potion.
It's not magic, but it's pretty darn close. But let's not forget about the mental and emotional benefits, which are equally profound.
Okay, ready to dive into that? How does yoga impact our minds and emotions?
Well, one of the most well-known benefits is stress reduction. Yoga practices, especially those that incorporate deep breathing and meditation, have been shown to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for calming the body and mind.
So, like hitting the pause button on our stress response.
Exactly. And when we reduce stress, we also reduce our risk of a whole host of health problems, from heart disease to anxiety and depression.
Makes sense. So, yoga is like a stress-busting superpower.
I love that. It really is. But it's not just about reducing stress. Yoga can also improve focus, clarity, and cognitive function.
Really? So, it can make us sharper mentally?
Yep, studies have shown that regular yoga practice can improve memory, attention span, and even creativity. It's like giving your brain a workout, but in this gentle and nourishing way.
This is amazing. I'm starting to see why so many people swear by yoga. It's like this total mind-body transformation.
It really is, but we're not done yet. Let's talk about the emotional and spiritual benefits, which can be even more profound.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How can yoga help us emotionally and spiritually?
Well, yoga is all about self-awareness. It encourages us to tune into our bodies, our breath, our thoughts. And when we develop that awareness, we can start to understand our emotions better, see them more clearly, and relate to them with more compassion.
So, it's about getting in touch with our feelings, not just trying to push them away.
Exactly. And when we understand our emotions, we can manage them better. We can learn to respond to challenging situations with more calmness and resilience. It's like building emotional intelligence through movement and breath.
That's a valuable skill in today's world, where everything seems so hectic and stressful.
Totally. And on a spiritual level, yoga can help us connect with something bigger than ourselves, whether that's a sense of purpose, a connection to nature, or a feeling of belonging to something greater.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, yoga philosophy teaches that there's this universal consciousness that connects us all. And through practices like meditation and mindfulness, we can tap into that consciousness and experience a sense of oneness, of belonging, of coming home to ourselves.
That sounds pretty profound.
It can be a truly transformative experience. It can help us find meaning and purpose in life and cultivate a sense of peace and gratitude, even amidst life's challenges.
Wow, I'm feeling inspired. We've covered so much ground today, from the ancient origins of yoga to its incredible benefits for the body, mind, and spirit. I feel like I've just completed a yoga immersion course.
You have. And you know what's even more exciting? This is just the beginning of the journey.
What do you mean?
There's so much more to discover. Different styles of yoga, different teachers, different practices. It's an ongoing exploration of self-discovery, and it's a journey that unfolds uniquely for each individual.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So, what's our takeaway message for our listeners today?
Hey, I think if you're curious about yoga, if something we've talked about today has sparked your interest, give it a try. Find a style that resonates with you. Find a teacher you connect with, and be open to the transformative power of this ancient practice. You might be surprised by what you discover.
I couldn't agree more. And who knows, maybe we'll even inspire some folks to submit their own material for a personalized deep dive in the future.
I'd love that. The world of yoga is vast and ever evolving. There's always more to learn and explore.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the world of yoga. Until next time, keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep diving deeper.